What if I told you Atlas was the only Vegapunk who hasn't been attacked yet since a traitor and Seraphim began attacking? Atlas is the representation of violence, which is exactly what this situation entails as Shaka got his brains blown out at the end of chapter 1077. Atlas can transform into other people with a mask and creates holograms of anything deceiving people and reality itself. And did you know the definition of Atlas when describing a person is one who bears a heavy burden? And oh boy, does Atlas have a heavy burden on his mind. Atlas is the true traitor, and I have 100% proof. Shout out to Mr. Bushido for bringing this insane theory to my attention, and the deeper I dug, the more insane the theory became. I spent the last 3 days rereading all of Egghead looking for any clue, and let me tell you, the evidence is mind-blowing. This is the Atlas traitor theory, and by the end, you'll be fully convinced that York is not the real traitor, and instead it has been Atlas all along. During chapter 1075, York was turned into stone after being attacked by S-Snake during the Seraphim attack. We never saw her after, and she only popped back up in chapter 1078 for the traitor reveal. Now keep this in the back of your mind because it will be important later. Adagrius looks like he's pretty much dead at this point, getting stomped and creating a massive explosion. And then there's Shaka, who got shot when entering the mystery room and was looking for the person who was controlling the Seraphim and the main Vegapunk body. Then there's Edison, who's breathing his last Vegaclone breaths in Nami's arms after being attacked. And obviously the main body Vegapunk isn't the traitor, as he's trapped in an undercover bunker just witnessing someone kill Shaka, and we can see his shock reaction to Cypher Pole being trapped in that room and to York killing Shaka. My point here is that everyone except for Atlas has been attacked after the Seraphim started running rampant. And what is Atlas' reactions to Robin bringing up the obvious fact that Seraphim are raging through Egghead Island? That's right, she denies it and gets super defensive. This is the moment that I began thinking that Atlas is the true traitor. Really, it's down to either York purposely being turned into stone and then escaping off screen, or Atlas, who hasn't been attacked by Seraphim and we haven't seen any Seraphim even near Atlas, and now Robin and Chopper. And speaking of Robin and Chopper, this is where things got crazy. Robin is a genius. Chopper, he's a gullible childlike idiot. And Oda is just a complete madman because he paired Robin and Chopper together with Atlas. You see, Chopper believes everything. Chopper even believes in Usopp's most ridiculous lies and didn't even notice the fake Straw Hats were not his true friends during their return to Sabaody. I mean, think about it. He couldn't realize this wasn't Luffy after a 2-year training arc? Chopper is a perfect pairing for Atlas as the traitor because Chopper is so stupid and it's showcasing him believing lies and deceptions from Atlas. And then Robin, being a genius, a perfect contrast to Chopper, as she is heavily questioning Atlas and suspecting an investigation with the Vegapunk and Seraphim situation. Essentially, Chopper's willing to believe anything that Atlas says while Robin is questioning her lies simultaneously. A perfect pairing to make us suspect the true traitor because both hint at Atlas being sus. She might try to trap Robin into that room and hold her hostage since the world government needs Nico Robin and she is one of the most important figures in the story the closer we get to the One Piece. Remember, even in Wano, Cypher Pole was trying to go after Robin but failed again. And now let's take a quick look back at Water 7, the last time we had a murder mystery with crazy twists and reveals. In Water 7, we had a fake death, Cypher Pole taking off their mask and had fake body doubles. Atlas can also take off masks and can use holograms and create fake body doubles.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably Tennessee, that says, "Fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again."
It's not an exact parallel, but knowing Oda's tendencies to show us something and wildly subvert our expectations into an even crazier mind twist, I feel like York being the traitor could be only the first step into deceiving us into the actual traitor, which is Atlas. I was watching Mr. Morge's video on Egghead Island and the traitor situation being undervalued and overshadowed by all the hype going on in the arc. Blackbeard vs. Law, Shanks and Kid at Elbaf, Garp, and the eventual hype of Kizaru and Saturn, Buster calling Egghead, taking away all the attention from the current murder mystery plotline. But the more I thought about this, I began to say to myself, what if this is actually his intention all along? What if Oda actually purposely had us consumed and intrigued with insane reveals and the eventual hype of Egghead's finale, so that when he began the insane whodidit reveals and murder mystery, we would be even more shocked? In other words, if everyone is focused on these bigger hype moments, it would distract us from the little details hidden in plain sight. All of the super sus hints pointing at Alice being the actual traitor, and in the end, a more hard-hitting mystery. Going back to Robin, she is the smartest, but the fact that she specifically brings up a question asking what if something happens to Vegapunk's main body while they're distracted, showing Robin of all people is figuring out that something could happen to Vegapunk right now as we speak. She's onto something for sure, especially now with the Seraphim attacking. I mentioned earlier that Atlas was way too defensive, almost in a weird way. When Robin says the Seraphim are running amok, Atlas replies extremely defensively with "You're wrong, that doesn't make any sense," because she realizes Robin is onto something. And just think about how stupid a response this is from the smartest being. How can you not hear, observe, and at least consider that the Seraphim are out of control attacking everyone when you can hear how chaotic everything is out there, especially when the Seraphim just attacked recently before? It's such a ridiculous response, which makes me question Atlas even more, and it only gets worse. Robin didn't even consider that Atlas is in the right. Robin is trusting her own intuition and her own wits over this genius. Why? Well, because at this point she's already suspected Atlas and all of the Vegapunks. And I love it because it's just another moment to showcase Robin's intelligence. We don't really get these moments too often, but when they do come, they're very appreciated. We see Robin completely disregard Atlas' ridiculously stupid comments and continue to talk about Sanji protecting Nami, specifically so that Alice and Chopper can't recommend going to protect Nami, who is relatively weak, and go and fight the Seraphim. Robin is slowly uncovering the mystery, and she doesn't want any excuses or distractions so she can continue to unravel everything. And while she's basically saying let's keep going and keep looking for Vegapunk, you can see Atlas behind Chopper and Robin with one of the most guilty and exposed looks on her face that I have ever seen. Remember in the beginning of the video, I told you to keep York in the back of your mind. The fact that she was turned to stone, escaped off screen, and then is revealed to be the traitor? Here's the crazy part, because what if I told you that Atlas can change her looks and body however she wants? What if I told you that Atlas can create holograms, potentially of herself and more importantly, of others? And this part isn't even a theory, it's a fact because Atlas himself says it. And now I think you see where I'm going with this, because what if I told you that York was stuck in stone the entire time and Atlas made a hologram of York, which is the one that we saw in chapter 1078, who was revealed the traitor, a fake version of York? Or what if that actually is Atlas, who's been shape-shifting into other characters? With Atlas taking the mask off, this would be an insane plot twist. After all of this, I went back from the very beginning of Egghead, read through the entire arc, and what I found was truly insane. Remember Atlas's introduction? In chapter 1062, Atlas' introduction has insane evidence pointing towards Atlas being the traitor. But first, it takes so much time to research and to make these videos. I read through all of Egghead, worked my ass off to get this out as fast as possible, so consider subscribing for future One Piece theories just like this. I have a huge theory coming out soon that I know you'll love, which could potentially spoil the entire ending of One Piece, but also dives into the entire history of the Monkey D family and their importance. In chapter 1062, Atlas's introduction, Bonnie says, "Don't bother, everything here is lies." Right before Atlas is introduced. In fact, this is the entire theme of Atlas's introduction. Lies, deception, and it's ironic how Bonnie is telling Chopper of all people, the most gullible character, not to believe the Atlas lies. And yeah, that hits a whole lot harder after Chopper is paired with Atlas during the chapter where the traitor is revealed later in the arc. I want to point out how in the beginning of Egghead, we learn about the holograms and light and perception tying back into deception. During Atlas's introduction, we see some very sus panels like Atlas saying, "I'm a scientist for hire." But the more disturbing aspect is the fact that Atlas admits that he doesn't believe or live in reality. Reality is completely blurred in the mind of Atlas, saying whether it's real or not is up for you to decide, because if you ask me, those words are a relic of a bygone era. Atlas lives in a twisted delusion since he can no longer tell real from fake. These mind games become very tricky, but this is what Atlas and more specifically Oda's goal is, as he makes us question everything that is happening but also distracts us from the truth with lies. And once again, Atlas' introduction ends coming back to this point that we can't trust or believe anything that comes from him, with Bonnie saying, "No way, what's this lie you're talking about?" Sure, in context, we're talking about Bonnie not believing this is Vegapunk because she's already met the actual main body of Vegapunk, but I still think this entire entire interaction is suspicious when you consider the main points, themes, and the fact that it's all about Atlas deceiving everyone from reality and tricking us through our own visual perceptions, and Bonnie repeatedly making the point of Atlas being a liar and deceiver in this introduction. And if this wasn't already enough to make you suspicious of Atlas, I have more. You see, Shaka is good, Lilith is evil, Edison is thinker, Pythagoras is wisdom, York is greed, but Atlas is violence. And to me, this seals the deal. Shooting Shaka, unleashing the violent child war experiments on the Straw Hats, and everything that the traitor is doing is completely violent. After rereading Egghead, there's plenty of other strange moments with this theory and context, like Atlas tricking Luffy and Bonnie into eating food and stealing clothes, setting them up to be attacked by a Kuma police pacifista. I mean, Jinbei even says, is this supposed to get the death penalty? It seems like an excessive punishment. When you see Kuma shooting lasers out of his mouth ready to end the Straw Hats right then and there, yeah, Atlas, that was a little sus. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but what if I told you that sneaky little Oda already told us that York, who killed Shaka, was actually Atlas all along? Because in Atlas' first introduction, Oda shows us Atlas with a number 6. You might think, okay, so what? But York is actually the 6th Vegapunk, and we see this during her introduction wearing the number 6 as well. Sneaky little Oda trying to throw us off his trail, saying, oh, it was just an accident. But knowing Oda, this is Goda foreshadowing, linking York and Atlas together for the traitor reveals, pulling the mask off and seeing who's truly behind this betrayal. Oda's on his Scooby-Doo arc, since the mystery is pulling you back and forth, teasing us, setting up ridiculous twists, and making my head spin this entire arc. Now, before I give you Atlas's motivation for why he has betrayed the Vegapunks, I have the final nail in the coffin. But first, consider leaving us super things in the comments with your hottest One Piece takes, and you could be featured in a future video where I give my opinion on these crazy takes. Chapter 1071, Atlas is exposed. Atlas was easily defeated by Lucci before Lucci and Luffy fought, but later on in chapter 1071, all of the Vegapunks gathered. Of course, all the Vegapunks except Atlas. In this chapter, Stussy is shown speaking on the snail to Vegapunk, but shortly after, the Frontier Dome was deactivated. All of the Vegapunk who are together are freaking out and confused. Even York is there with them, and even Stussy is confused as to what the hell is going on because this allows CP0 to attack. The only reason people forgot about this tiny detail is because Stussy took care of Lucci and Kaku easily soon after they entered, and this took away from the mystery, and because the Frontier Dome was restored quickly enough in the same chapter to make it seem random and inconsequential, people forgot. But who opened the Frontier Dome in the first place? The answer? Of course, it was Atlas. How was Shaka not able to see Atlas on the camera is an interesting question on its own, but it's possible that Atlas transformed or escaped another way. Or maybe Atlas has a specific hologram that was designed to be undetected by snails, or at least trick them to get past. And when the Seraphim first begin attacking in chapter 1072, it's also when Atlas was still separated from the group. We finally see Atlas again in chapter 1074, casually reappearing as if he was never missing, and this is very conveniently right before Shaka reveals the snails lost their consciousness or left their stations. So my theory is that during that time, Atlas opened the Frontier Dome and ordered the Seraphim to destroy the dome and attack the snails so that he couldn't be seen by Shaka's snails. And this is backed up even further because in chapter 1075 we see a shadowy figure destroying the snails right after attacking Pythagoras. And oh man, this shape has a very similar shape to Atlas. Look at his head with the curly hair, floppy ears. To me, this looks exactly like a silhouette of Atlas. I'm fully convinced this figure was either Atlas or a shadowy blackened silhouetted style hologram of Atlas to hide his face from being seen that close to the camera, because only a few pages later, Atlas says, I can change my looks and body however I want. I mean, if that isn't just fully spelling it out for you, I don't know what is. Chapter 1075 is also suspicious because we see Boa turn York into stone, and isn't it just kind of weird that York just shows up a few chapters later as the traitor? When I look at Atlas, I see an almost Two-Face inspired design, with Atlas having a white and dark shading split down the middle of her head. This design inspiration could be another hint from Oda that he is literally Two-Face and is the traitor. 1075 is titled Labo two-faced death game, which perfectly leads to Atlas's motivation. Because by now, if you believe that Atlas is the traitor, you may be wondering, why? What is his motivation for all of this? And this is where things get even more wild. In chapter 1064 of Egghead, we see Shaka for the first time on a call with Dragon, but what he says is so interesting. He says, being a genius means being able to see even what your own future contains. I suspect my death is imminent. Shaka predicted and prophesied his own death. And then later in chapter 1078, York says, the world doesn't need more than one of us, when referring to the Vegapunks. And this is where I began thinking, maybe Shaka has this ability to see the future, but also since the Vegapunks all fused their minds together, all the Vegapunks were aware of this prophecy. This prophecy may have had specifically stated that only one Vegapunk will survive. And so for the last few months, this freaked out Atlas, and out of fear of his existence being erased, Atlas decides that he will be the one Vegapunk who is going to survive. And it's ironic to me since I believe Vegapunk is also a traitor in a sense, because in his cover story during the Egghead arc, we see him betray his former mad colleagues and sell his soul to the world government. We even see him smiling with the Godose behind, making for one of the creepiest images, because who in their right mind would be this happy while meeting the Godose? It's super sus, but let's be real here. Vegapunk, he's idealistic and noble as his goal is an endless supply of energy. But Vegapunk is somewhat Machiavellian, doing ridiculously evil and horrible deeds like creating child slaves, weapons of war, and armies of destructive weapons for the world government. Even if he was forced, he was testing on King, treating him like a lab rat simply because he's a Lunarian. And going back to Frankie and Tom's ideology of creating anything, let's remember, this is simply their viewpoint, their ideology, and honestly a great way to cope with your disastrous consequences. But Vegapunk takes this to another level, where his creations are straight up inhumane, like cloning for example. But since the Vega clones are all just separate versions of Vegapunk, it makes sense that one of these Vegapunks would betray them, since Vegapunk did that same thing to his mad friends all those years before. I mentioned this in the beginning of the video, but the definition of Atlas when describing a person is one who bears a heavy burden. And if I'm right about Atlas being the traitor and his motivation being wanting to survive after seeing Shaka's prophecy months ago, it would be the most fitting name ever, as Atlas is truly carrying the heaviest burden as he betrays the other Vegapunks and keeps these CP members hidden in the room all along. I also think there's a few questions worth addressing, because if York really wants to be a celestial dragon and is the real traitor, then why is she hiding CP members in a shady basement all this time? That doesn't really add up, does it? So is it possible that Atlas was lying when pretending to be York here? I mean, after all, I proved earlier that Atlas was straight up lying to Robin in the same chapter. And then the biggest issue with any Vegapunk being the traitor has always been, how would he have done this for multiple months without letting the others find out, especially since they fuse their minds and information every day? Well, I'm not sure how Atlas pulled this off, but I can guess, considering that since the Vegapunks most likely do understand the ins and outs of the system, they could find a way to withhold certain parts of the transfer. I mean, Vegapunk even said that he sees all the Vegapunks as equals, but Shaka says Vega clone satellites are expendable. In chapter 1071, he says, we are satellites. If we have to sacrifice ourselves, it will be worth it to make sure Stella survives. And Atlas might see himself as expendable as well, and so he didn't fully trust Vegapunk the same way the main body Vegapunk trusts his clones. This brings me on to my final prediction for the Egghead arc. With hyping up the next day as the world-shattering event, I believe the main Vegapunk will go on and die in a similar fashion to Roger or Whitebeard, and when I say that, I simply mean that Vegapunk will use his final words to change everything, exposing some secret about the ancient kingdom, the world government, the One Piece, or the Sun God, who knows? And ultimately, I think Atlas is found out to be the traitor and he will die as well, but the final Vegapunk who will survive the entire event will be Lilith. That's right, the first Vegapunk we saw, the best fitting for a future Straw Hat, even if it's only temporary. It would be an amazing story too, as Lilith is responsible for carrying on the will of Egghead and all the Vegapunks. I've been saying for a while now that Dragon will show up in this arc and finally meet with Luffy, since we saw Shaka early in the arc talking to Dragon and he's also connected with Kuma. This will be how Luffy is shoved into the final war as he escapes with the revolutionaries who are already in a war with the celestial dragons. And Dragon allying with Luffy will push everything into motion for the final war. If you enjoyed this video or anything I said, leave a like. Go show some love to Mr. Bushido. I'll leave a link to his original Reddit post. He helped me with this video a ton and came up with a lot of this theory on his own, and I think it's his best theory ever. And if you want another crazy One Piece theory, click on this video where I convince you that Sanji is a Seraphim.